Ricardo's laughter died in his throat. The scene was a distorted mirror of his own cruelty. The bull, as if sensing the son's malice, turned abruptly, not towards the elderly woman, but towards the fence where Ricardo leaned, still in shock. With a powerful roar, the animal charged. The old wood cracked, planks flew into pieces, and the fence collapsed under nature's brute force. Ricardo, caught by surprise, fell backward. His laughter transformed into a scream of terror. He wasn't touched by the horns, but the fear that engulfed him was deeper than any physical wound. There, on the ground, exposed and vulnerable, he saw the bull not as a killer but as the guardian of a justice he had never imagined. The inheritance now seemed too small a price for the soul he had lost. The impact of the cold ground against Ricardo's back knocked the air from his lungs in a choked grunt. For an instant, the world narrowed to the sound of his own heart pounding erratically and the acrid smell of dust and manure. The fence, now in ruins, lay scattered around him like the wreckage of his own morality, of his sordid plans. He tried to stand, but his legs felt like jelly, trembling uncontrollably. Fear, a sharp, paralyzing cold, had seized every fiber of his being, his eyes, wide and bloodshot, fixed on the bull. The animal, a colossus of muscle and contained fury, hadn't moved. It remained there, imposing between Ricardo and his mother, its horns still pointed at the fallen sun. It was a living, impassable barrier, a wall of flesh and bone that stood where before there had only been the intent of death. Donna Sofia, still prostrate on the ground, watched the scene with an overwhelming mix of terror and perplexity. Her body ached, every bone protesting the impact of the fall, but the physical pain was overshadowed by the shock, by the disbelief of what she had just witnessed. Her son, her own flesh and blood, had tried to kill her, and now the very animal meant to be her executioner was her protector. The bull, as if sensing the elderly woman's gaze, slowly lowered its head, almost with an unexpected reverence. It gently nudged Sophia's fragile body with its snout, a delicate and surprising touch, as if to ensure she was all right. There was no aggression, only a strange and unexpected tenderness. Ricardo saw this. He saw the stark contrast between his own calculated malice and the irrational compassion of a beast. The sight struck him like lightning, more devastating than any goring. The panic, until then a distant murmur, began to transform into overwhelming despair. Ricardo needed to get out of there. He needed to get away from that bull. From that silent judgment, the animal seemed to impose with its mere presence. He crawled backward, dragging himself across the packed earth, his eyes fixed on the giant. Each movement was slow, calculated, fearing to provoke the animal's wrath. But the bull, as if reading his innermost thoughts, stepped forward, blocking any escape route. Its eyes, once furious and wild, now seemed to carry a dark intelligence, an understanding of the evil Ricardo represented. The bull didn't attack, but its presence was a constant threat, an invisible and indestructible prison. Cold sweat ran down Ricardo's forehead, mixing with the dust. The inheritance, the money, the power, everything seemed insignificant, futile in that moment. He was trapped, not just physically, but morally. The image of his mother, helpless and betrayed, and of the bull, her improbable savior, etched itself into his mind, an indelible stain that could never be erased. He tried to shout, to call for help, but his voice failed, caught in his throat, a knot of terror and guilt. The air felt thin, heavy with the tension of the confrontation, with the weight of his sins. The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop for such a grotesque drama. Shadows lengthened, and each shadow seemed to hide a danger, an impending judgment. The bull, with a slow and deliberate movement, positioned itself to keep Ricardo in sight, but without moving away from the elderly woman. It was as if the animal had a plan, a strategy. It wasn't just a bull. It was a guardian, a judge, perhaps even an executioner. Ricardo felt a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary animal. There was something supernatural, inexplicable in its behavior, in its unexpected wisdom. The legend of the killer bull, which he had so often used to justify his plan, now turned against him, but in a way no one could ever have predicted. The bull didn't want to kill his mother. It wanted to protect her from him, from her own son. Ricardo tried to stand again, this time with more urgency, with growing desperation. He needed to get out of there before anyone saw him in that humiliating and dangerous situation. But the bull reacted with a deep snort, a clear warning, a sound that vibrated in his chest. Ricardo fell back, his heart pounding against his ribs. Meanwhile, Donna Sofia, with the help of the bull's gentle snout, managed to sit up. She felt a sharp pain in her leg, but the adrenaline and shock prevented her from focusing on it. Her eyes, full of unshed tears, fixed on her son. There was no hatred, only a profound sadness, a disappointment that weighed more than any fury, more than any physical pain. She had given him life, and he had tried to take it. The bull, as if sensing the elderly woman's pain, let out a low roar, almost a lament. Then, with a surprisingly agile movement for its size, it turned, but not to attack Ricardo. Instead, it used its horns to gently push the fallen fence, creating a small protective barrier around Donna Sofia, an improvised nest of broken wood. It was a gesture of care, of protection, that contrasted brutally with Ricardo's murderous intent. The bull then positioned itself between Sofia and Ricardo, a living wall, its eyes fixed on the sun, waiting. Ricardo was trapped, not by bars, but by the imposing and inexplicable presence of an animal that refused to be the monster he expected. The sun set completely, plunging the farm into a somber twilight, and Ricardo knew that the approaching night would be the longest and most terrifying of his life. He wasn't just trapped in the pen, he was trapped in his own nightmare, with a bull as his jailer and his mother as the silent witness to his fall. Night descended upon the farm like a heavy, merciless shroud, swallowing the last embers of twilight. Ricardo, still prostrate on the cold, damp ground of the pen, felt the icy air penetrate his bones, a chill that came not just from the temperature, but from the terror consuming him. His eyes, now accustomed to the gloom, saw the bull as a colossal silhouette, a living, menacing shadow that rose between him and freedom, between him and any semblance of sanity. The animal didn't move, but its presence was a silent torture, a wordless condemnation. Each deep snort, each slow movement of its head seemed a warning, a countdown to an uncertain fate. Ricardo tried once again to drag himself away, his muscles stiff and aching, but the bull merely stepped forward, blocking his path with terrifying precision. There was no uncontrolled fury, only a cold, calculating determination that the bull seemed to possess. It was as if the beast was relishing its role as executioner, as judge, prolonging the defendant's suffering. The bull, as if sensing the elderly woman's anguish, let out a low roar, almost a lament, and then, with a surprisingly delicate movement, pushed the fallen fence again, adjusting it to offer more comfort to Donna Sofia. It was a gesture of care, of protection, that contrasted brutally with Ricardo's murderous intent. That animal, which was supposed to be a monster, was the personification of the compassion that he, the son, had lost. Ricardo felt a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary animal. There was something supernatural, inexplicable in its behavior, in its unexpected wisdom. The legend of the killer bull, which he had so often used to justify his plan, now turned against him, but in a way no one could ever have predicted. The bull didn't want to kill his mother. It wanted to protect her from him, from her own son. The shadows of the night deepened, and with them the sounds of the farm intensified. The croaking of frogs, the buzzing of insects, the distant howl of a dog. Each sound seemed to amplify Ricardo's loneliness and despair. He was trapped, not just physically, but morally. The image of his mother, helpless and betrayed, and of the bull, her improbable savior, etched itself into his mind, an indelible stain that could never be erased. He tried to shout, to call for help, but his voice failed, caught in his throat. A knot of terror and guilt. The air felt thin, heavy with the tension of the confrontation, with the weight of his sins. The inheritance, the money, the power. Everything seemed insignificant, futile in that moment. He was trapped, not just in the pen, but in his own nightmare, with a bull as his jailer and his mother as the silent witness to his fall. Night advanced, and Ricardo felt the cold of the earth penetrate his thin clothes. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the fear that paralyzed him. He looked at the gate, now a dark, unreachable silhouette. There was a chance, a minimal chance, that someone would come looking for them, but the farm was isolated, and he had made sure no one would be around that night. The irony was cruel. He had planned every detail so that no one would interfere with his crime, and now that same solitude was his prison. The bull let out a deep snort, and Ricardo flinched, expecting the attack that never came. The animal seemed to be toying with him, psychologically torturing him. Its eyes, once furious and wild, now seemed to carry a dark intelligence, an understanding of the evil Ricardo represented. The inheritance now seemed too small a price for the soul he had lost. He was trapped, not by bars, but by the imposing and inexplicable presence of an animal that refused to be the monster he expected. The night would be long, and Ricardo knew that even if he survived, he would never be the same. The bull hadn't physically harmed him, but it had torn his soul, exposing the rottenness of his ambition. And there, under the starry sky, Ricardo understood that the true killer was not the bull, but himself. The night, which had once seemed a protective cloak for his crimes, now stretched like a shroud over Ricardo, suffocating him with the weight of his own conscience. The cold of the earth, penetrating his thin clothes, was an icy reminder of the coldness of his heart. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, not just from the biting air, but from the terror that paralyzed him, a visceral fear that gnawed at his soul. He looked at the gate, a dark and unreachable silhouette, just a few meters away, yet as distant as redemption itself. There was a chance, a minimal and desperate chance, that someone would come looking for them. But the farm was isolated, and he had made sure no one would be around that night, weaving a web of solitude for his mother and, ironically, for himself. The irony was cruel, a slow poison. He had planned every detail so that no one would interfere with his crime, and now that same solitude was his prison, his private hell. The bull let out a deep snort, a sound that vibrated in the heavy, damp air, and Ricardo flinched, expecting the attack that never came. The animal seemed to be toying with him, psychologically torturing him, prolonging his agony with a cruelty that rivaled his own. Its eyes, once furious and wild, now seemed to carry a dark intelligence, an understanding of the evil Ricardo represented, a silent and relentless judgment. The inheritance now seemed too small a price for the soul he had lost, a handful of coins stained with blood and betrayal. He was trapped, not by bars, but by the imposing and inexplicable presence of an animal that refused to be the monster he expected, and that instead had become his tormentor. The night would be long, and Ricardo knew that even if he survived, he would never be the same. The bull hadn't physically harmed him, but it had torn his soul, exposing the rottenness of his ambition. And there, under the starry sky, Ricardo understood that the true killer was not the bull, but himself. Each minute that dragged on felt like an eternity, measured by the nocturnal sounds of the farm and the frantic pounding of his own heart. The bull, a dark and silent mountain, maintained its vigil, Its horns pointed at Ricardo as a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Ricardo tried to move again, dragging himself sideways, searching for any chink in the animal's watch, any loophole for freedom. But the bull, as if it had eyes in the back of its head, turned its head, and one of its horns grazed the earth a few centimeters from Ricardo's face, a clear warning, an impassable boundary. The strong smell of the animal, mixed with the damp earth and manure, invaded his nostrils, intensifying the sensation of imprisonment. Donna Sofia, nestled in the fallen fence, watched everything with a disturbing stillness. The pain in her leg was constant, but the pain in her heart was infinitely greater. She looked at her son, not with the fury he deserved, but with a lacerating compassion, the compassion of a mother who sees her son lost in the depths of darkness. Her eyes, watery, shed no tears. They seemed to have dried up, consumed by the magnitude of the betrayal. The bull, sensing the elderly woman's stillness, let out a soft snort, almost a murmur of comfort, and with its snout pushed a piece of wood closer to her, as if to offer additional support. It was a gesture of tenderness that wounded Ricardo more than any goring, for it revealed the monstrosity of his own act in contrast to the unexpected humanity of the beast. Despair began to mix with anger in Ricardo. Anger at himself, anger at the bull, anger at the situation. He tried to shout, but his voice was hoarse, caught in his throat. "Mother," he managed to whisper, his voice almost inaudible. "Mother, help me, please." Donna Sofia didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on him, a mirror of his own misery. The bull, however, reacted. It stepped forward, its eyes fixed on Ricardo, and then, with a slow and deliberate movement, lowered its head, scraping a horn on the ground, raising a small cloud of dust. It wasn't an attack, but a demonstration of power, a reminder of who was in control. Ricardo felt a shiver run down his spine. He was being judged, not by a court of men, but by a creature he had underestimated and disrespected. The legend of the killer bull, which he had used as an alibi, was now a cruel irony. The animal was not an irrational killer. It was a guardian, a judge, and perhaps his executioner. Time seemed to distort, each second stretching into an eternity of torment. He thought of the farm, the acres of land that would be his, the money that would fill his pockets. Everything seemed empty, meaningless, before his mother's gaze and the imposing presence of the bull. Suddenly, a distant sound broke the oppressive silence of the night. A bark, faint at first, but unmistakable. Ricardo lifted his head, a flicker of hope, however tenuous, igniting in his chest. Someone. Could someone be coming? The bull also seemed to notice. Its ears twitched, catching the sound, and it turned its head slightly in the direction of the bark. For an instant, the animal's attention diverted from Ricardo. It was the chance he had been waiting for. With a new surge of adrenaline, Ricardo pushed himself, desperately dragging himself towards the gate, ignoring the pain in his muscles and the cold that numbed him. He needed to get out of there before the bull turned its full attention back to him, before dawn broke and revealed his shame to the world. But the bull, even with divided attention, was not foolish. With a quick and surprising movement, it repositioned itself, blocking Ricardo's path, and let out a powerful roar, a sound that echoed through the night, not just as a warning, but as a challenge. The barking ceased. The silence returned, even heavier, and Ricardo knew his escape attempt had failed. The night was still young, and his nightmare was far from over. The bull's roar reverberated through the night, a primal sound that tore through the veil of darkness and lodged itself in Ricardo's soul. It was not just a warning, but a sentence, a verdict delivered by a creature he had cruelly underestimated. The distant barking ceased abruptly, as if the night itself had swallowed any remnant of hope. The silence that followed was heavier than before, filled only by the erratic pounding of Ricardo's heart and the echo of his own failure. He cowered again, his body trembling uncontrollably. The cold of the damp earth penetrated his bones, but it was the cold of fear that paralyzed him, an icy terror that spread through every fiber of his being. The bull, a dark and imposing mass, slowly turned its head, its eyes gleaming with a dark intelligence that Ricardo now recognized as that of a patient predator. There was no furious rage in them, but a calculating vigilance, an unwavering determination. Ricardo tried to drag himself backward, seeking refuge against the pen wall, but the animal stepped forward, blocking any movement. It was as if the bull knew exactly what he was thinking, anticipating every escape attempt, every glimmer of hope. The inheritance, the money, the power, everything turned to dust in Ricardo's mind. None of it mattered now. The only real things were the strong smell of the animal, the heavy warmth of its breath, and the menacing shadow of its horns. He looked at Donna Sofia, still nestled in the fallen fence, her eyes fixed on him. There was no explicit condemnation, no anger, only a deep and exhaustive sadness. It was the gaze of a mother who saw her son not just fail, but destroy himself, lose himself in an abyss of ambition and cruelty. That silent compassion was a heavier burden than any accusation, a mirror reflecting the monstrosity of his actions. The pain in the elderly woman's leg was an insignificant detail compared to the pain in her heart, a wound that would never heal. The bull, as if sensing the silent connection between mother and son, let out a soft snort, almost a lament, and turned slightly, positioning itself between Ricardo and Donna Sofia like a protective shield. It was a gesture Ricardo couldn't comprehend. An animal, an irrational beast, acting with more humanity than he himself. The irony was a sharp blade, cutting deep into his conscience. The hours dragged on, each minute a torture. Ricardo tried to close his eyes, but the images of his mother falling, of the bull stopping centimeters from her, and of his own insane laughter repeated in his mind. A private horror film. Sleep was an unattainable luxury, and exhaustion only intensified his torment, mixing reality with vivid nightmares. The cold of dawn began to intensify, cutting Ricardo's skin like 1,000 needles. He could see the mist rising from the ground, dancing like ghosts in the darkness. Dew began to form, wetting his clothes and making the ground even more slippery. The farm, once a symbol of his wealth and power, was now a scene of his ruin, a stage for his humiliation. Suddenly, the bull let out a low moan, a sound Ricardo had never associated with such a large and powerful animal. The sound seemed to come from its throat, a hoarse, deep rumble. Ricardo flinched, expecting an attack, but the bull merely lowered its head, scraping its snout on the damp ground, as if searching for something, or perhaps lamenting. Donna Sofia, who had remained motionless until then, moved slightly. A faint groan escaped her lips. The pain in her leg, which had been masked by shock and adrenaline, now made itself felt with full intensity. The bull raised its head, its eyes fixed on the elderly woman, and then, to Ricardo's surprise, it approached her with an almost reverent slowness. With its snout, the bull gently nudged Donna Sofia's leg, as if assessing the extent of her injury. There was no aggression, only a strange curiosity, a genuine concern. Ricardo watched, incredulous. The animal he expected to be a merciless killer was acting like a caregiver, a protector. The sight of his injured mother and the bull's unexpected compassion finally broke something inside Ricardo. A wave of overwhelming guilt hit him, stronger than any physical pain. He had planned her death, had desired her inheritance, and now she was suffering not because of the bull, but because of him. And the bull, whom he had tried to incriminate, was there, a silent and loyal guardian. "Mother," he whispered again, his voice choked with emotion. "Mother, forgive me, please." Donna Sofia raised her eyes to him, and this time tears were streaming down her aged face. They were not tears of physical pain, but of a profound sadness, of a disappointment that transcended any pain. She didn't respond, but her gaze was more eloquent than 1,000 words, a silent testament to his betrayal. The bull, as if sensing the change in atmosphere, let out a deep snort, a sound that seemed to echo Donna Sofia's pain and Ricardo's guilt. It turned again to Ricardo, its eyes fixed on him with renewed intensity. The message was clear. The night was not yet over, and the judgment was still ongoing. Ricardo felt a chill run down his spine. He was trapped not just in the pen, but in his own personal hell, with the bull as his jailer and his mother as the silent witness to his fall. Dawn was approaching, but for Ricardo, the darkness of his soul seemed eternal. Dawn advanced, and with it, the darkness of night began to give way to a pale, ghostly grey. The cold, once merely icy, now became cutting, penetrating Ricardo's clothes and bones. He could feel the dense dew accumulating on his skin, mixed with the cold sweat of panic. Donna Sofia's silent tears, streaming down her aged face, were a heavier burden than any goring, a mirror reflecting the monstrosity of his actions. The bull, an imposing silhouette against the slowly brightening sky, remained motionless, its eyes fixed on Ricardo, a vigilance that did not waver. Guilt, once a distant whisper, now roared in his ears. The image of his mother falling, the sound of his own insane laughter, everything repeated in an infernal loop. The inheritance, the power, the farm. Everything seemed a cruel joke, a mirage that had led him to this abyss of despair. He was a man who had everything, and now had nothing except the silent condemnation of his mother and the relentless judgment of a beast. "Mother," he tried again, his voice a thread barely audible above his own trembling. "Mother, please, forgive me. I don't know what came over me. The words were lost, choked in his throat, as empty as his intentions. He tried to drag himself a little closer to her, a desperate movement for a touch, for a sign of absolution, but the bull let out a deep snort, an unequivocal warning. The animal stepped forward, its heavy hooves sinking into the damp mud, and positioned itself again between Ricardo and Donna Sofia. There was no fury in its eyes, but a cold determination, an unquestionable authority. It was as if the bull knew that Ricardo was not even worthy of approaching the woman he had tried to sacrifice. The irony was a blade turning in his conscience. The creature he expected to be the killer was now the guardian, and he, the son, the failed predator. Donna Sofia, despite the evident pain in her leg, did not avert her gaze from Ricardo. Her tears continued to fall, but there was no weakness in them, rather a silent strength, the strength of one who had seen the worst and survived. It was the gaze of a mother who, even in the face of the deepest betrayal, still felt the pain of seeing her son lost. She offered no solace, no verbal condemnation, only the raw truth of her disappointment. The first ray of sun, timid and pale, crept through the clouds, painting the horizon with shades of purple and orange. The faint light began to dissipate the shadows, revealing the contours of the pen, the mud, the fallen fence where Donna Sofia was nestled, and more cruelly, it revealed Ricardo's pathetic figure, huddled on the ground, trembling, his face marked by fear and guilt. The day was dawning, and with it, the exposure of his shame. The bull, as if the sunrise were a signal, let out a deep roar that made the ground vibrate. It wasn't the roar of an attack, but of a decision. It turned its head, not towards Ricardo, but towards the main fence of the pen, that same sturdy wooden fence from where Ricardo had laughed, from where he had pushed his mother. Its eyes, once merely vigilant, now burned with focused intensity. Ricardo watched, paralyzed by terror. The bull took a few steps towards the fence, its muscles tense and powerful. It lowered its head, scraping its horns on the ground one last time, like a gladiator preparing for the final battle. The air grew heavy, charged with a primal energy. Ricardo knew with an icy certainty that something monumental was about to happen. With a sudden and explosive movement, the bull charged the fence. It wasn't a disordered attack, but a calculated, precise blow. The massive horns crashed against the wooden planks, and the sound of the impact echoed through the still sleeping farm, a dry crack followed by a deafening crash. The old wood trembled, cracked, and, with an agonizing groan, gave way. Splinters flew through the air, dust and dirt rose in a dense cloud. An entire section of the fence, the very one Ricardo had used as a prop for his malicious laughter, was torn from its posts, falling with a heavy thud to the ground. A hole opened in the barrier that confined them. The bull stepped back, panting, its flanks rising and falling. It didn't look at Ricardo, but at Donna Sofia, as if presenting her with the path to freedom. The fence was down. The judgment had entered a new phase. Ricardo, however, felt no relief. The sight of the destroyed fence, of the bull's brutal and deliberate force, only intensified his terror. He was trapped, not by the fence, but by his own conscience, by his mother's gaze, and the imposing presence of the animal. The sun, now stronger, bathed the scene with a cruel light, revealing every detail of his humiliation. The night had ended, but Ricardo's nightmare was just beginning. The fence was down, a portal to freedom opening in the wooden barrier. But for Ricardo, the sight brought no relief, only a new layer of despair. He was trapped not just by the planks and wire, but by the invisible web of his own conscience, by his mother's gaze, and by the imposing presence of the bull. The sun, now stronger, bathed the scene with a cruel light, revealing every detail of his humiliation, every broken splinter of wood, every drop of dew on the mud. The night had ended, but Ricardo's nightmare was just beginning. Donna Sofia, with a groan of pain that barely escaped her lips, tried to move. Her leg, swollen and throbbing, protested with every slightest effort. She looked at the fallen fence, at the hole the bull had created, and then at the animal, which remained motionless, its eyes fixed on her with an almost human intensity. It was a silent invitation, a promise of passage. The bull did not rush her, did not force her. It simply waited, a patient and vigilant guardian. Ricardo watched, his heart pounding erratically in his chest. "Mother, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse from panic and cold. "Mother, don't go. I need you. I don't know what came over me." His words were a tangle of pleas and empty excuses, without weight, without sincerity, not even to himself. He tried to drag himself again, but the bull let out a low snort, a clear warning, and stepped forward, blocking any attempt to approach. The message was undeniable. Ricardo was not worthy of approaching the woman he had tried to murder. Still, Ricardo didn't give up. The fear of loneliness, of condemnation, was stronger than the physical pain he felt. "Mother, I love you. I swear. It was a mistake. Please forgive me. I'll take you to the hospital. I'll take care of you. I'll do whatever you want," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Dirty with mud and dew, but they were tears of self-pity, not genuine remorse. Donna Sofia finally managed to sit up, leaning against the intact fence. Her eyes, once filled with sadness, now held a cold determination. She did not look at Ricardo. Her attention was turned to the bull, and a silent communication seemed to pass between them. The animal, as if understanding, lowered its head slightly, almost a bow. Then, with surprising delicacy for its mass, it moved aside, opening the way to the fallen fence. The pain was excruciating, but Donna Sofia began to drag herself, inch by inch, towards freedom. Each movement was a calvary, but she persisted, driven by an inner strength Ricardo had never understood. The bull watched her, its eyes vigilant, ready to intervene if necessary. Ricardo felt a cold panic. She was leaving. She was abandoning him. "Mother, no, please don't leave me here. I'm cold, I'm scared." He tried to stand, but his legs were numb, his muscles stiff from the cold and terror. He fell back into the mud, a heap of misery and despair. The bull, hearing Ricardo's laments, let out a deep roar, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. It was not a roar of anger, but of warning, of condemnation. It turned to Ricardo, and its eyes, once merely vigilant, now burned with contained fury. The message was clear. Freedom was for Donna Sofia, not for him. Donna Sofia, with a final effort, managed to pass through the hole in the fence. She was free from the pen, but not from the pain, nor from the memory of her son's betrayal. She stopped for a moment, turned and looked at Ricardo. There was no hatred in her gaze, nor forgiveness, only a deep and unwavering disappointment. It was a look that said, "You made your choice, and now you will have to live with it." The first crow of a distant rooster echoed through the farm, announcing the arrival of a new day. Soon the workers would begin to rise. The sounds of tractor engines would fill the air. Discovery was imminent. Ricardo knew it. He was exposed, vulnerable, and shame was a heavy cloak that enveloped him. The bull, seeing Donna Sofia safe outside, turned its attention to Ricardo. It took a slow step, then another towards the man huddled in the mud. Its heavy hooves sank into the damp ground. Each step a hammer blow to Ricardo's conscience. The animal seemed to be in no hurry. It was as if it was savoring the moment, the final judgment. Ricardo tried to crawl backward, but there was nowhere to go. The intact fence was behind him, the bull in front. He was cornered no longer by the physical structure of the pen, but by his own guilt and the silent guardian of justice. The sun rose higher, painting the sky with vibrant colors, but for Ricardo, the world was closing in on an endless darkness. The bull stopped a few meters from him, its eyes fixed, a predator that had found its prey. The night had ended, but Ricardo's true hell was just beginning under the merciless light of day. The bull advanced, each step a dull thud in Ricardo's chest, an echo of his own erratic heartbeat. Its heavy hooves sank into the mud, raising small spurts of damp earth. There was no haste in the animal's movement, only a cold, calculated inevitability. Ricardo tried to crawl backward, scratching his nails on the wet earth, but the bull was too fast, or he, Ricardo, was too paralyzed by terror. The intact fence, which had once seemed a protective barrier, was now a wall of condemnation, trapping him between the wood and the beast. "No, please, no." Ricardo's voice was a hoarse murmur, almost inaudible, a pathetic lament lost in the icy morning air. He closed his eyes, expecting the impact, the pain, the end. But the impact didn't come. Instead, he felt the bull's warm, heavy breath on his face, the smell of earth and hay, the overwhelming proximity of a primal force. He slowly opened his eyes and saw the bull's eyes just centimeters from his own. There was no uncontrolled fury, but a dark intelligence, a silent judgment that pierced his soul. The bull did not attack him. It merely stopped imposing, its massive horns hovering over Ricardo's head like a sword of Damocles. It was a torture more cruel than any physical attack. The beast cornered him against the fence, not with violence, but with its mere presence, the constant threat that prevented him from breathing, from thinking, from escaping. Ricardo was trapped, not by a fence, but by the weight of his own guilt, reflected in the animal's deep eyes. Outside, Donna Sofia watched. The pain in her leg was excruciating, but she did not avert her gaze. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only the confirmation of a tragedy she had already foreseen. The dry tears on her face were a testament to a pain deeper than the physical. The pain of a mother who saw her son consumed by his own darkness. She made no move to help, to intervene. This was Ricardo's reckoning. and she was merely a witness, a victim who had become the personification of justice. The sun continued to rise, bathing the farm in an increasingly strong light. The first sounds of farm life began to intensify. The creak of a distant gate, the bark of a dog, the sputtering engine of a tractor before it caught. Each sound was an alert, a ticking clock, announcing the imminent arrival of day and, with it, discovery. Ricardo felt a chill that did not come from the morning cold, but from the dread of exposure. "Mother, please, help me," he whispered again, his voice almost inaudible, broken. But Donna Sofia remained motionless, a monument of disappointment. The bull, as if understanding the plea, let out a deep snort, a sound that seemed to mock Ricardo's entreaty. It moved its head slightly, and one of its horns brushed Ricardo's shoulder, a light touch but laden with threat, reminding him of his vulnerability. Ricardo's panic transformed into despair. He was alone, abandoned by his own mother, cornered by an animal that refused to kill him, preferring psychological torture. The image of his malicious laughter as he pushed Donna Sofia into the pen returned forcefully, a flash of memory that nauseated him. The irony was brutal. He had laughed at his mother's misfortune, and now he was the one cornered, humiliated, at the mercy of a creature he had underestimated. Suddenly a closer sound, the noise of hurried footsteps on the packed earth, voices approaching. "Donna Sofia! Donna Sofia, are you all right?" A worried male voice broke the tense silence. It was Pedro, the farm foreman, who had been awakened by the bull's roars and the sound of the fence breaking. Ricardo felt his blood run cold. It was the end, the exposure, the shame. He tried to shrink further, wishing the earth would swallow him. The bull, however, did not move. It remained there, between Ricardo and the fallen fence, like a guardian, a judge, presenting the scene to the world. Pedro, followed by two more workers, arrived at the edge of the pen. Their eyes widened at the sight of Donna Sofia sitting in the mud, pale and injured, and then turned to the inside of the pen. The shock on their faces was palpable. The fallen fence, the imposing bull, and Ricardo, huddled in the mud, his eyes wide with terror, trapped under the animal's shadow. "My God! Donna Sofia, what happened here?" Pedro exclaimed, rushing to help her. He kept his eyes on Ricardo, a mix of confusion and horror on his face. The other workers, equally shocked, approached, their voices mingling in exclamations of astonishment. Ricardo felt the weight of all eyes on him. The silent judgment of men he considered his subordinates. The humiliation was unbearable. Tears returned, but this time they were not of self-pity, but of genuine despair, of a shame so profound it burned. He was exposed, his cruelty raw and naked, revealed under the merciless light of the rising sun. The bull, as if its mission was accomplished, let out a final snort, a sound that seemed to seal Ricardo's fate. The night had ended, and Ricardo's hell had just become public. Justice, in a way no one could have predicted, had finally arrived. Pedro's voice, laden with concern, cut through the air, questioning the inexplicable. His wide eyes fixed on Donna Sofia, then on Ricardo, and finally on the bull. The other workers, standing at a respectful distance, murmured among themselves, incredulity and horror painted on their faces. The scene was surreal. The farm matriarch, injured and muddied, outside the pen, and the rich sun, the heir, huddled in the mud, under the menacing shadow of the killer bull. Pedro, with the agility of someone dealing with emergencies, knelt beside Donna Sofia. "Donna Sofia, for God's sake, what happened? You're hurt. We need a doctor." His voice was a mix of panic and loyalty. He tried to touch her, but she recoiled slightly, not from fear of him, but from the excruciating pain radiating from her leg. Donna Sofia raised her hand, a weak gesture, but with an authority that silenced Pedro. Her eyes, though tired and swollen, held the same cold determination Ricardo had seen before. She did not look at Ricardo. Her attention was turned to Pedro and then to the other workers, one by one, as if she were assessing their ability to comprehend the truth that was about to be revealed. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the bull's occasional snort and the distant sound of the first farm engines coming to life. Ricardo, still cornered, felt every beat of his heart reverberate in his ears. He could feel the workers' gazes on him, judging, questioning. Cold sweat ran down his forehead, mixing with the mud and dry tears. He wanted to scream, to deny, to beg, but the words were caught in his throat, suffocated by shame and terror. Donna Sofia took a deep breath, a breath that seemed to cost her immense effort. "Ricardo," she began, and the mere mention of her son's name made all eyes turn to him. Her voice was hoarse but firm, laden with a pain that went beyond the physical. "He pushed me." Those 3 words fell like heavy stones in the morning air. The reaction was immediate. The murmurs ceased. The workers' eyes widened in shock, then in contained fury. Pedro, who had been kneeling, slowly rose, his expression transforming from concern to horrified disbelief and then to pure rage. He looked at Ricardo, and what he saw was a man who was no longer his boss, but a monster. Ricardo, hearing his mother's words, felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He tried to stammer a denial. "No, Mother, it's not true. But his voice failed. The bull, as if responding to the revelation, let out a deep roar, a sound that seemed to confirm the accusation, a thunderclap that echoed through the farm, sealing Ricardo's fate. The animal did not move, but its presence was a silent and powerful condemnation. Pedro took a step towards the pen, his fists clenched. "You wretch! How could you do such a thing to your own mother?" The rage in his voice was palpable, years of loyalty to the family transforming into a visceral hatred. The other workers, though still hesitant to approach the bull, began to gather, their expressions mirroring Pedro's. Donna Sofia, with superhuman effort, managed to lean on the fallen fence and partially stand. "He wanted the inheritance," she continued, her voice gaining strength, each word a stab to Ricardo's heart. "He pushed me to the bull to get rid of me." The confession, spoken aloud, under the light of the rising sun, was the final sentence. Ricardo's face was pale, his eyes wide, fixed on his mother. He saw not only the woman he had tried to kill, but the personification of his own ruin. The image of his laughter, of the malice in his heart, now reversed, and he was the target of scorn, of condemnation. He was naked, exposed, his rotten soul revealed for all to see. The bull, still imposing, took a lateral step, opening the space between itself and Ricardo a little more, but without moving away completely. It was as if it were offering Ricardo one last chance to face the consequences of his actions, without the animal's direct intervention. But Ricardo was paralyzed, unable to move, to think, to react. Pedro, with a look of disgust, turned to the other workers. "Call the police and an ambulance for Donna Sofia, now!" The order was given with an authority that Ricardo, in his state of shock, could not dispute. 2 men ran, one to the main house, the other to the nearest phone, their voices fading into the distance as they shouted the shocking news. Donna Sofia, observing the scene, felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Justice was coming, but at what cost? The pain in her leg was intense, but the pain in her heart, the pain of seeing her son transform into something so monstrous, was infinitely worse. She knew that life on the farm would never be the same. Innocence had been lost, replaced by an indelible stain of betrayal and cruelty. Ricardo, huddled in the mud, heard Pedro's orders, the hurried footsteps of the workers, the sound of the bull snorting a few meters from him. The sun continued to rise, bathing the farm in an increasingly strong light. But for Ricardo, The world was closing in on an endless darkness. He had tried to get rid of his mother to inherit a fortune, but now he was about to lose everything: his freedom, his dignity, and any trace of respect. The bull, the silent guardian of justice, remained there, its eyes fixed on Ricardo. It was no longer just an animal. It was a symbol, a herald of a brutally revealed truth. The night of terror had ended, but Ricardo's true hell, the hell of public exposure and condemnation, was just beginning. Under the relentless gaze of the sun and the men he had tried to deceive, the sun, once a silent accomplice to the darkness, now rose as a relentless witness, bathing the farm in a light that did not forgive. For Ricardo, each ray was a spear, piercing the last layer of his denial. Donna Sofia's words, "He pushed me to the bull to get rid of me," echoed not just in his ears, but in every fiber of his being, a sentence delivered not by a judge, but by his own mother, under the gaze of his own employees. He was there, huddled in the mud, the imposing shadow of the bull still over him, a living, breathing condemnation. The murmurs of the workers, once distant, now became more audible, a chorus of shock and revulsion. Ricardo could feel the weight of each gaze, the transformation of servile admiration into open contempt. He was the boss, the heir, the man who dictated the rules, but in that moment, he was just a coward, an exposed monster. Cold sweat ran down his forehead, mixing with the dirt and dry tears, forming salty rivulets that stung his eyes. His throat was dry, words caught, suffocated by a knot of terror and shame. He wanted to scream, to defend himself. But what defense could there be against the raw, naked truth his mother had just uttered? The image of his laughter, of that moment of perverse triumph as he pushed Donna Sofia, now haunted him, a distorted mirror of his own cruelty. Donna Sofia, despite the excruciating pain in her leg, remained firm, leaning against the fallen fence. Her eyes, though tired, radiated a strength Ricardo had never seen before, a determination forged in betrayal and survival. She did not look at him with anger, but with a profound sadness, the pain of a mother who saw her son fall into an abyss of no return. It was a pain more cutting than any whip, more humiliating than any scream. Pedro, the foreman, was the personification of fury. His fists clenched, his face red. He seemed ready to leap into the pen and take justice into his own hands. But the bull, the silent guardian, was still there, between Ricardo and the outside world, maintaining its distance but never moving completely away. It was as if the animal was ensuring Ricardo remained in his own private hell, under everyone's eyes, until true justice arrived. The minutes dragged on, each second an eternity of agony for Ricardo. He heard the hurried footsteps of the men who went to call the police and ambulance, the sound of their shouts fading into the distance, carrying the news of his disgrace beyond the farm's limits. The farm, his kingdom, now became his prison, and he, the king, a prisoner of his own wickedness. Then, a distant but unmistakable sound began to cut through the morning air. A siren, far off but approaching, growing louder, clearer, the sound of law, of order, of consequence. Ricardo felt an icy chill run down his spine, a dread that surpassed even his fear of the bull. The siren was the melody of his end, the harbinger of a life undone. The other workers who had been murmuring now fell silent, their eyes fixed on the dirt road leading to the farm. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with anticipation. Donna Sofia closed her eyes for an instant, a solitary tear tracing a path down her marked face. She had done what needed to be done, but the cost was her son's soul and the peace of her own life. The siren became a wail, and soon a police car, followed by an ambulance, appeared on the horizon, raising a cloud of dust, The vehicle stopped abruptly at the edge of the pen, and the doors opened. Two police officers in their impeccable uniforms and two paramedics with their first aid kits stepped out. The first police officer, a serious-faced man with keen eyes, surveyed the scene. Donna Sofia, injured and leaning on the fence. The workers, with expressions of shock and anger. The imposing bull and Ricardo, huddled in the mud, under the animal's shadow. His eyes widened slightly as he processed the image, a mix of disbelief and professionalism. "What's going on here?" The officer's voice was firm, cutting through the tense silence. Pedro, his voice choked with rage, pointed at Ricardo. He pushed his own mother to the bull. "Sergeant, to get the inheritance." Pedro's words were a final blow to Ricardo. He tried to lift his head, tried to stammer something, but his voice was no more than a whimper. The officer's eyes fixed on him, assessing him, and Ricardo felt completely naked, his soul exposed to the cold light of the law. The bull, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, let out a deep snort, a sound that seemed to seal the condemnation. The night of terror had ended, but Ricardo's true hell, the hell of public exposure and condemnation, was just beginning, under the relentless gaze of the sun and the men he had tried to deceive. The morning air, once pure and promising, now became dense, heavy, with the newly revealed truth and the imminence of justice. The sergeant, a middle-aged man with experience etched into every line of his face, absorbed Pedro's words like a direct blow. His eyes, which had previously surveyed the scene with professional curiosity, now fixed on Ricardo with an intensity that seemed to pierce his soul. The accusation, "He pushed his own mother to the bull, Sergeant, to get the inheritance," was so shocking, so vile, that for an instant the officer seemed to hesitate, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the rich and respected farmer with that of a potential parricide. But the scene before him spoke louder than any denial. Donna Sofia, pale and injured, leaning on the fallen fence. The faces of the workers, marked by a mixture of horror and contained fury. And Ricardo, huddled in the mud, under the imposing shadow of the bull, which seemed an ancestral guardian of a brutal truth. There was no room for doubt. The truth, raw and naked, was there, exposed to the relentless light of the rising sun. The paramedics, more pragmatic, were already approaching Donna Sofia. With gentle, professional movements, they helped her sit up, assessing her injured leg. The pain was visible on her face, but the dignity, the unwavering strength that kept her upright, was even more evident. She looked at Ricardo, not with hatred, but with a profound sadness, a maternal grief that transcended the betrayal. It was mourning for a son she had lost to his own greed. The sergeant took a step towards Ricardo, his eyes never leaving the cowering man. "Mr. Ricardo." His voice was calm, but laden with unquestionable authority. "You've heard the accusation. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Ricardo tried to lift his head. His lips moved, but no intelligible sound came out. His throat was dry, his mind a whirlwind of terror and denial. He wanted to scream that it was a lie, that it had been an accident, that the bull was to blame. But his mother's words, the cruel laughter he had let out moments before, the image of her falling into the pen, all of it suffocated him. He was a man who had lost his voice, not from physical fear, but from the overwhelming shame of his own exposed wickedness. The officer knelt slightly, approaching the pen, maintaining a respectful distance from the bull, which observed the scene with a disturbing calm. "Mr. Ricardo, I need you to answer. What happened here?" One of the paramedics, while immobilizing Donna Sofia's leg, cast a glance at Ricardo. "She has an open fracture, Sergeant, and several abrasions. It's serious." The paramedic's voice, laden with concern, only served to intensify the gravity of Ricardo's situation. Pedro, who had approached, could not contain his indignation. "He laughed, Sergeant. Laughed while she fell. I saw it. We all saw it. Other workers nodded, confirming Pedro's words, their voices joining in a chorus of silent condemnation. Ricardo felt the ground give way beneath him. The web of lies he had tried to weave fell apart into 1,000 pieces, each thread pulled by the irrefutable truth. He was the boss, the man of power. But now he was there, stripped of everything, reduced to a pathetic and despicable figure. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now reflected an animalistic dread, terrified not only by the law, but by the moral condemnation that enveloped him. The sergeant, with a heavy sigh, stood up. "Mr. Ricardo, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words, cold and procedural, sounded like a death knell for Ricardo. The police officers approached the pen, one of them with handcuffs in hand. The bull, sensing the movement, let out a deep snort, an alert sound, but did not charge. It seemed to understand that its part in justice was done, and now it was the men's turn. However, its presence was still a powerful reminder, a silent guardian that would not allow Ricardo to escape unpunished. When the cold handcuffs clicked shut on his wrists, Ricardo felt an electric shock run through his body. The metallic sound sealed his fate, a final echo of his fall. He was pulled out of the pen, stumbling in the mud, his eyes fixed on Dona Sofia. She watched him, a tear streaming down her face, a mixture of pain and relief, but also an immense sadness for the loss of her son, not to death, but to the darkness of his own soul. The workers, once hesitant, now crowded together, their gazes of contempt piercing Ricardo like knives. He was the monster, the traitor, the man who had tried to kill his own mother for money. The farm, which he so desired to inherit, would now be the stage of his disgrace, a monument to his cruelty. As he was led to the police car, Ricardo cast one last look at the bull. The animal was there, imposing and silent, its dark eyes fixed on him. There was no anger, only a calm, almost wise observation. It was as if the bull, the herald of justice, was there to witness the end of an era, the collapse of a man who dared to defy not only the law of men, but nature itself. The sun continued to rise, bathing the farm in an increasingly strong light, revealing every detail of the scene, every mud stain, every tear, every shadow of regret. But for Ricardo, the daylight was merely an extension of his personal hell, a stage lit for his public humiliation. His true hell, he knew, was just beginning. The police siren, once a distant harbinger, now wailed softly as the car drove away, taking Ricardo far from the farm he so coveted. Handcuffed, huddled in the back seat, he felt the vehicle sway as the rhythm of his own downfall. The image of Dona Sofia, pale and injured, yet with a gaze that mixed sadness and a strange resignation, etched itself into his mind. It was a look that held no hatred, but a profound grief for the loss of a son to the darkness of his own soul. The bull, the silent giant, remained in his memory as an implacable judge, its dark eyes witnessing every act of his disgrace. At the farm, the silence that followed the police car's departure was almost as heavy as the tension that had preceded it. Paramedics worked with urgency and professionalism on Dona Sofia. Carefully, they laid her on a stretcher, immobilizing her fractured leg. Each movement was accompanied by a muffled groan from the elderly woman, but she maintained her composure, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if seeking a piece of stolen peace there. Pedro, his fists still clenched, but his fury now tempered by a bitter relief, approached the stretcher. "Dona Sofia, you'll be all right. Justice has been served." His voice was hoarse, laden with emotion. She slowly turned her head, a faint melancholic smile on her lips. "Justice has a high price, my son. A price I don't even know if I'm ready to pay." her eyes filled with tears, not from physical pain, but from the grief of a mother who saw her son taken to a dark destiny, a destiny he himself had forged. The sergeant, after ensuring Ricardo was en route to the station, turned his attention back to the scene. He instructed one of the officers to cordon off the pen area while he himself began to collect statements from the workers. One by one, they came forward, their voices initially hesitant, but gaining strength as indignation and the need for truth propelled them. Each account was a brick in the wall of Ricardo's condemnation. The cruel laughter, the deliberate push, the indifference as his mother fell, the bull's unexpected protection. The bull, in turn, continued its vigil. It had moved slightly away from the fallen fence, but remained within the pen, observing the activity with a calm that belied the recent violent events. Its dark eyes seemed to absorb every detail, every word, as if it were the guardian of an ancestral truth that transcended human understanding. The workers looked at it with a mixture of respect and admiration, a respect they had never shown Ricardo. To them, the bull was not just an animal, but an instrument of divine justice, a herald of truth. As Donna Sofia was carefully placed in the ambulance, she asked to see the bull one last time. The back door was opened, and she, lying on the stretcher, could see the animal. Their eyes met. There was no fear, only profound gratitude. She murmured something inaudible, a silent thank you to the being who, against all expectations, had become her protector. The bull, as if understanding, let out a soft snort, a sound that seemed like a farewell, an acknowledgement. The ambulance departed, taking Donna Sofia to the hospital to heal her physical wounds. But the wounds in her soul, the marks of her own son's betrayal, would take much longer to heal if they ever fully did. The farm, now silent, seemed to breathe a different air. The oppression Ricardo had exerted had dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief, but also of melancholy. The sergeant continued his meticulous and serious work. He knew the story unfolding there was extraordinary, shocking, and would require a rigorous investigation. The evidence was strong, the testimonies unanimous. Ricardo's downfall would not just be a legal matter, but a scandal that would shake the community. The farm, once a symbol of wealth and power, would now forever be associated with greed and cruelty. The workers slowly began to disperse, their conversations in murmurs, their gazes still laden with shock and a strange satisfaction. That day, which began with the promise of routine work, had transformed into a watershed moment, a day when the truth, however brutal, had come to light. They knew their lives would change, that the farm would never be the same. But above all, there was a sense that finally the scales of justice had tipped to the right side. The sun was already high, its golden rays bathing the pen, the dirt ground, and the fallen fence. The bull, still there, now seemed less an animal and more a statue, a living monument to courage and unexpected compassion. Its presence, once feared, now inspired respect. It had been the catalyst, the guardian, the silence that screamed the truth when men fell silent. And as the day advanced, the story of Paradise Farm and of the bull that protected the mother from her killer began to spread, echoing through the fields, through neighboring villages, a tale of horror, betrayal, and unexpected animal redemption. Ricardo's era had ended, and with it, the farm prepared for a new and uncertain dawn. The farm, now silent, seemed to breathe a different air. The oppression Ricardo had exerted had dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief, but also of melancholy. The sergeant continued his meticulous and serious work. He knew the story unfolding there was extraordinary, shocking, and would require a rigorous investigation. The evidence was strong, the testimonies unanimous. Ricardo's downfall would not just be a legal matter, but a scandal that would shake the community. The farm, once a symbol of wealth and power, would now forever be associated with greed and cruelty. At the hospital, Donna Sofia underwent emergency surgery to treat the open fracture. Hours dragged on in a haze of pain and sedatives. When she finally awoke, the physical pain was merely a distant echo of the anguish that gnawed at her soul. The nurse, a kind, middle-aged woman, tried to comfort her. "You're safe now, Donna Sofia. The surgery was a success." But physical safety could not erase the image of her son, the look of contempt, the cruel laughter. Pedro was one of the first to visit her, bringing wildflowers and words of support. "The farm is at a standstill, Donna Sofia. The men are shocked, but everyone is with you. No one will work for that monster anymore." Pedro's loyalty was a balm, but the truth of his words weighed heavily. The farm, her home, her entire life was in limbo, a reflection of the chaos that had settled within her own family. Meanwhile, within the cold walls of the police station, Ricardo faced the harsh reality of his new existence. The luxury of his home, the prepared meals, the unquestionable authority, all had been replaced by a cramped cell, bland food, and a complete loss of control. He tried to argue, deny, blame the workers, but the testimonies were unanimous, the evidence overwhelming. The sergeant, with a serious demeanor, presented the charges: attempted aggravated murder, compounded by kinship. The word mother echoed in the interrogation room, growing heavier, more condemnatory. Ricardo felt his world collapse around him, not just the farm, the inheritance, but his very identity, his status, his freedom. The news of Ricardo's arrest and the bull's story spread like wildfire. In neighboring villages, initial disbelief gave way to indignation. People gathered in town squares, bars, markets, discussing the case. Who would have thought Donna Sofia's son, such a respected man? Respected, he was a tyrant, and now he tried to kill his own mother. The story of the bull. The animal that became a protector added an almost mythical element to the tragedy, transforming the event into a living legend. The bull, once feared, was now seen as a hero, a symbol of a justice greater than that of men. Paradise Farm, which Ricardo so desired, had become the epicenter of a scandal that transcended regional borders. The tension was palpable, not only due to the gravity of the crime, but to the breaking of a taboo, violence against one's own mother, and the unexpected intervention of an animal. The future of the farm, of Donna Sofia, and of Ricardo himself was now in the hands of a legal system he so despised, and a community that condemned him without reservation. At the hospital, Donna Sofia's recovery was a slow and painful process. The fracture in her leg healed, but the invisible wounds in her soul seemed to deepen each day. The silence of the room was filled not by the hum of machines, but by the echoes of Ricardo's cruel laughter, the fall, the dust, and the bull's gaze. The nurse, always attentive, brought news from the outside world, but Donna Sofia barely heard it. The farm, her home, her life, now seemed a stage of tragedy, and her own son, the villain. Pedro visited her religiously, bringing not just flowers, but the hope of a future, however uncertain. "The men are with you, Donna Sofia. No one will leave the farm unattended. We're taking care of everything, waiting for you to come back." His words were a balm, but the truth was that the farm was in limbo. The animals needed care, the land attention, but the soul of the place was wounded, awaiting a verdict that seemed to take an eternity. Meanwhile, within the cold walls of the police station, Ricardo experienced the brutality of reality. The cramped cell, the smell of disinfectant, the bland food. Each day was a reminder of the life he had lost, of the inheritance he coveted, and that now slipped through his fingers. His lawyer, a shrewd and pragmatic man, tried to build a defense, but the workers' testimonies were unanimous, unshakable. The laughter, the push, the indifference. It was all there, etched in the memory of witnesses and now in police records. The charge of attempted aggravated murder, compounded by kinship, was an overwhelming weight. Ricardo tried to deny, to blame his mother for her fragility, the workers for their incompetence, the bull for its ferocity. But the truth, like an untamable bull, knocked down each of his lies. The sergeant, a man of few words but with a penetrating gaze, gave no quarter. Each question was a thrust, each piece of evidence, a nail in the coffin of his freedom. The news of the Paradise Farm scandal had spread like wildfire, not just through neighboring villages, but across the entire state. Newspapers ran shocking headlines. Radios discussed the case on debate shows. The story of the bull, the animal that refused to be a killer and became a protector, added an element of fascination and incredulity. It was the unexpected hero, the symbol of divine justice. Curious onlookers and journalists began to flock to the farm, transforming the crime scene into a macabre tourist attraction. They wanted to see the pen, the fallen fence, and, above all, the bull. The animal, once a threat, was now a reluctant celebrity. The workers, under Pedro's guidance, tried to maintain order, but the intrusion was constant. The bull, for its part, seemed oblivious to its newfound fame, grazing peacefully, but with a gaze that still carried the depth of one who had witnessed something terrible. For Donna Sofia, the publicity was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the community's solidarity was a comfort. Letters of support arrived in droves. Flowers filled her room. On the other, the public exposure of her son's betrayal was a constant humiliation. She was the victim, yes, but also the mother of a monster, and this duality gnawed at her. The decision to testify against Ricardo was the hardest of her life. How could a mother condemn her own flesh and blood, but how could she allow injustice to prevail? Tension mounted as the trial date approached. Ricardo, in his cell, began to feel despair. His privileges, his wealth, his influence, all proved useless against the force of truth and public indignation. He tried, through his lawyer, to make an offer to Donna Sofia, a part of the inheritance, a settlement, anything to avoid the trial. But Donna Sofia, though torn, had found a new strength. The strength of one who had been pushed to the abyss and rescued by an unexpected hand, a strong, protective paw. The farm, once a symbol of power and prosperity, was now a monument to greed and cruelty, but also to resilience and unexpected compassion. The bull, the silent giant, remained in its pen, a guardian of a new era about to be born. Ricardo's era had ended, and the future of Paradise Farm, of Donna Sofia, and of the bull itself would be decided in the courts, but also in the hearts of a community that had witnessed the impossible. The scales of justice, which once tipped towards darkness, now seemed firmly anchored in light, guided by the truth that an animal had dared to roar. The trial date finally arrived, hanging on the calendar like an imminent sentence. The small town and even distant regions turned their eyes to the courthouse, an improvised stage for tragedy and redemption. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with expectation and curiosity. Journalists jostled, cameras flashed, and the murmurs of the crowd outside were a constant hum. Ricardo, now a shadow of the arrogant man he had been, entered in handcuffs, his face pale and marked by deprivation, but still with a remnant of defiance in his eyes. He seemed not to grasp the gravity of his situation, or perhaps refuse to accept it. Then Donna Sofia entered. Leaning on a cane, her legs still recovering, she displayed a fragility that contrasted with the silent strength in her gaze. Her white hair framed a face marked by pain, but also by an unwavering dignity. The room fell silent, a wave of respect and compassion sweeping through. She was the victim, the betrayed mother, but also the personification of resilience. Testimonies followed, a unanimous chorus of condemnation. The farm workers, led by Pedro, testified with a clarity and conviction that left no room for doubt. They described the push, Ricardo's cruel laughter, the moment of terror, and most importantly, the bull's miraculous intervention. Pedro, his voice choked, narrated how the animal once feared had become a guardian, a living shield for Donna Sofia. Each word was a nail in the coffin of Ricardo's freedom, each detail irrefutable proof of his depravity. Ricardo's lawyer tried to disqualify the witnesses, to allege conspiracy, but the truth was an unstoppable force, crushing every lie. But the most anticipated moment, the climax of that drama, was Donna Sofia's testimony. She sat at the front, the microphone seeming a heavy burden. The prosecutor, with a gentleness that contrasted with the gravity of the case, began his questions. Donna Sofia, her voice initially trembling but gaining firmness with each word, described the fateful day. She spoke of Ricardo's gaze, of the greed that had consumed her son, of the push that plunged her into the abyss. And then she described the bull. "I saw death in his eyes," she began, referring to Ricardo, "but then I saw life in the bull's eyes. It stopped centimeters from me. It didn't attack me. It protected me." A tear streamed down her face, but it was not of weakness, but of profound pain and an even greater understanding. "My son pushed me towards death, but the bull pushed me towards the truth. The truth about human cruelty and the unexpected compassion that can come from where we least expect it." The room was in absolute silence. Only the sound of muffled sobs could be heard. Ricardo in his chair seemed to shrink, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and despair. The mask of arrogance finally fell. Donna Sofia continued, her voice now a thread of steel. "I don't wish ill upon my son. I wish for him to find his way back, to understand what he did. But justice must be served, not for vengeance, but so that truth may prevail." Her words echoed through the courtroom, not as a condemnation, but as a lament, an appeal to humanity. Ricardo's defense collapsed. There was no way to refute the clarity of the testimonies, Donna Sofia's raw emotion, the undeniable logic of the facts. The jury, after a brief deliberation, returned with the verdict. Guilty. Guilty of attempted aggravated murder, compounded by kinship. The word resonated, final and implacable. Ricardo collapsed, his cries of denial muffled by the guards who led him out of the room. The inheritance, the power, the farm he so coveted, all had transformed into a cold, dark cell. The sentence was handed down days later, a long prison term. Paradise Farm, once a symbol of his greed, would now be a monument to his downfall. Donna Sofia, though relieved by justice, carried the scar of her son's betrayal, but she was not alone. The community rallied around her. Pedro, with his unwavering loyalty, took over the farm's administration. Together, they began to rebuild, not just the fallen fences, but the soul of the place. Paradise Farm, under the new management of Donna Sofia and Pedro, transformed. It ceased to be a one-man empire and became an example of community and cooperation. The workers, now with rights and respect, prospered. The farm became a refuge, a place where the land was cultivated with love and animals were treated with dignity. And the bull, the silent giant, remained on the farm, no longer a threat, but a living symbol. It grazed peacefully, its deep gaze carrying the wisdom of one who had witnessed the worst of humanity and the best of compassion. It was the guardian of Paradise Farm's new era, an era of hope, justice, and unexpected redemption. The story of the rich farmer, his mother, and the bull that refused to be a killer echoed for generations, a reminder that true wealth lies not in land or cattle, but in the integrity of the heart and the courage to defend the truth, even when it comes from a strong protective hoof. The scales of justice, which once tipped towards darkness, now rested firmly in the light, guided by the truth an animal had dared to roar.